if I could go back to my question. So I'm just trying to understand the process by which a parent has a concern. So their first
Or a student.
or a student or staff member, their first step would be to go through Safe Schools Alert, correct?
They could always choose to go directly to the school administrator. I think Robert shared with us that at least in some survey or some research, 57% of students indicate that they would have some level of reluctance to do that. So Safe School Alert or some other type of different reporting process, the intent is that it would increase that percentage of students who would come forward to report something.
Gotcha. So then how does that concern get from the Safe Schools Alert, and maybe this is part of the process that hasn't been figured out, that concern has been received through the system and it comes to a school district employee, most likely, and then where does it go from there? I want to understand, the timeliness and just the process behind those steps there before threat assessment.
So depending on the level, then that's part of the procedure that we're working out right now. Depending on the type of concern that comes through the process, it will get routed in different directions. But as I said earlier, what we have to do is make sure that whatever concern comes in, we have a defined routing process for it so that it does not get missed somehow.
Got it. And that's
Ever get stopped at
Mr. Knoll.
Mr. Knoll? So like, let's say you get an email or a text, and are you ever the ending point for the determination of whether this is a threat or not? Or will you always hand it off to the appropriate personnel?
So it would, I think I understand the question. It would go to the school first for them to look at it, and then assess it, which would go through that internal process first.
So it's not, so you're making the decision who to send it to. You're not making the decision whether or not it's a threat.
Right, well, we will make the decision together as the district, how it's sent out. So it would be sent to it could be sent to multiple people at the same time.
Yeah, but not, what I want to clarify is not you alone, and I'm not saying this particularly about you, but not, there's going to be multiple people. If someone makes a threat that they're being bullied, you're not the one who's determining whether that threat is valid. You're going to send it to, let's say, Canyon Park Junior High principal, and then, or you'll send it to Heather, and then together.
Right. The alert system would send it. It could send it to those people all at the same time. So we would look at it together.
Oh, I see.
So my role,
Okay.
most likely, would be to make sure that we've closed out all of these.
I see. So it doesn't go directly to you. The system directs it where it's supposed to go.
Correct.
Okay.
So we have to set up those protocols
I
based
see.
on the type of concern that's entered into the system, how the routing would specifically. For example, a harassment, intimidation, and bullying may go both to the school as well as to Chris Bigelow as the district's HIB officer. And then Chris's responsibility in that would be to connect with the school, see if they need any assistance, but also to be making sure that they're appropriately following up on the concern.
Will that be information available to the person that is entering the threat so that they understand what happens next?
So you're referring to the reporting person?
Yes.
Yeah, they will get a number, whether they send it through email or text. They're working on the voicemail part or online, so they'd get like a tracking number or a ticket number. So they could go back in and enter that number and see what the status
Where
was.
is that? Okay.
The nice thing is we can also use that to communicate with them. We can say this was helpful, but we don't quite have enough information to take any action, and then ask some specific questions, and then they can respond. We still don't know who the person is, we just have this ticket number.
So I have a question about the updated rubric for determining whether to refer this for threat assessment or that's been adjusted. Is that 4411 or is that something
No,
else?
I'm sorry, 4411P is our procedure regarding relations with law enforcement. And so we have updated that procedure. Essentially, the long and the short of it is anytime there is a threat made towards a student or a staff member, we will contact law enforcement. That hasn't been specifically spelled out in the procedure. Now that will be specifically spelled out. That doesn't necessarily mean law enforcement will follow up on all of those. They'll continue to use their discretion as they always do, but the procedure on our side will be to report all of those incidents to law
And it'll be
enforcement.
documented, you'll have a record of it, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
So I heard you say that this was going to, as soon as it was determined by cabinet, I believe it was going to go out to staff, the 4411P. I'd just like to see a copy of it too.
Well, we can put a copy in this week's board review.
And so the other piece, the determining threat assessment piece in the schools, I haven't seen that changed rubric either. So I was interested in seeing that.
So the 4411P, we just created the memo, and it's going in your board briefing, already sent it to Cindy, so that's coming with the memo and the 4411P. The threat assessment, so 4314 is the updated policy that's coming in the first September board meeting. So I think I put that in as part of the action plan. You saw it last Friday in the briefing, so that's coming. That's the new threat assessment, or the new policy notification of threats of violence or harm. And I also believe last Friday I sent the information item. It was the threat assessment process and guidelines. So that's the whole packet that we worked on as a team. So the one thing that we worked on, and it was Chris, Kathleen, Heather, and I with Shannon Hitch, and then a team of assistant principals and principals to make sure that people knew the different levels of threat, and we all had the same definition. You created, or we revised the decision-making tree for principals. Is it a transient low-risk threat, or is it a substantive moderate to high-risk imminent danger threat? So that came to you, and the 5 steps.
So you're aware I've had some mail issues and I haven't had that yet, so I'm unaware of that.
Okay,
And if
so I
that
think-
is in a board briefing, then I
From
will
last week.
eventually get it.
Yeah, you'll get it. And it's gone out to Heather and Kathleen as and Chris. It's going to be a training in September for the principals and assistant principals. And we're planning a big training in March where we can bring all our agencies together, because we will need law enforcement, mental health specialists, and our teams from each school, along with, and we're going to bring somebody in who actually is one of the authors of the book that we cited in the memo, and that we've taken this from, which is what state of Virginia based all their work on. Okay?
So
Yes, that,
just got handed to me.
yes.
So is this the change that was done?
To the threat assessment documentation that we have utilized in the past. We've had a bit of a cumbersome process that when we talked to principals and assistant principals and with Chris and team, that we needed to be really more clear and concise, and so we went kind of to the folks who have done a really great job on this, which is the Department of Education through Virginia, and the authors of the book that I noted in the memo, which is guidelines for responding to student threats of violence.
And
In the memo.
that's that.
That's also from that. What we did was we revised it to add a few things that we wanted to have in there. For example, in step 2, consider the perspective of the victim. We thought that was critical and a missing piece. And also to make sure we all understood when it said serious or moderate risk of threats, we added the definitions on the bottom so that we, again, could all go from the same consistent definitions. We added contact director of student services in the step 1. So, and we want to make sure that we do have records. So when we're talking about do we have written documentation, that if you look in step 3A, you'll see it says place threat assessment and response report in the student queue file and add notes to the electronic student information system, Synergy. Right? And we do the same in step 4A and the same in step 4B and 5, so that we're consistent.
Carolyn, all of this will be in under the electronic school board agenda item when it comes for approval for 4314.
This is an information item?
The threat assessment won't be.
It's not a-
The policy.
But
board.
the
The
policy that
policy
we're
is,
creating,
absolutely.
so
Yes.
it might be helpful to have the background information on it as well.
Sure.
I'm supporting that.
Sure.
Excellent addition, consider perspective of the victim. I think that was an excellent addition to that, if it wasn't part of their book.
As part of our work with our team. Really extensive team conversation. Okay.
Thank you.
And
And thank you
we're-
for sharing it with me. so I can
We're
see it.
looking at, we're going to implement this fall, and when we get together and we're going to work as a team to determine how did it work, what were some bugs. It's a fillable form, so our principals and assistant principals can fill out the documentation, and then when we get to the training in March or April, we'll have some good feedback from them.
So if somebody uses this safety burst, is that what it's called, safety burst?
Say schools alert.
Safe Schools Alert.
Uh,
Then the process will go through this threat assessment rubric.
It would depend on exactly what's reported as to
Right.
whether or not that process would be utilized. I mean, a safety concern could involve drug dealing. A safety concern could involve students who are selling stolen goods at school. I mean, it could be any one of a number of things, so it's not necessarily always going to be something that would resolve it.
Right.
Yeah.
Two different things. A threat is someone actually making a threat, so like.
To harm. I
harm,
think that's the
correct.
piece, that's what
Okay.
ties it to 4314,
Okay.
the board policy. It's about violence or harm.
That's a good clarification.
4314.
Yes, you have it in that
Right.
board briefing that you'll get in the mail
But
at
who
some
knows?
point in time.
And then 4411, it does say on this form that 4411,
P,
no, it
Oh,
also
4411?
says policy 4411 is going to be reviewed.
and we determined as a team that it did not need updates, that it was aligned enough with the WASDA policy. So it was really 4411P that we needed to tighten up.
Can we bring that forth anyway, since we've been talking about being able to look through this, the lens of culture? I think it'd be good for the board to be able to, that we have the reading to go through it.
We'll put both the policy and the revised procedure in this week's briefing.
You talk about the procedure or the policy, I'm sorry.
How about both?
Okay.
So we were already planning on putting the revised 4411P, the procedure, in the briefing, and we'll include 4411, the underlying policy as well, so you can take a look at that.
Yeah, I think it's good to have them both together. Sure. Makes it more clear.
Sure.
Do board members have any other questions?
Thank you, Carol.
I just appreciate the hard work that's gone into this. I know I've been a part of at least the meeting today and another meeting earlier in the summer. And I think we've, done some really good work on this. And I think, in my opinion, we've accomplished, the administration and staff has accomplished a lot in a short amount of time. More than what I would have expected where we would have been at this point. So.
I agree. Thank you all. Right, next item on the agenda is the project acceptance, August 2015. Any questions on this item?
I have a question, and this has to do with my complete lack of knowledge of lighting, but the installation of outdoor lighting at North Creek High School, to me that was a large number. And I know that we get questions about installing outdoor lighting at our junior highs. If that's what it costs, that would be helpful to know, or if this is part of more because it's a new facility.
Definitely more because it's a new facility, but it's all the field lights. So
Okay.
not just one
One
field,
field.
it's baseball field, football field.
So what would one field at Kenmore Elementary, did you say, Kenmore Junior High?
I know we get asked for,
What would one football, is it, field cost to illuminate?
To eliminate?
To illuminate.
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 I would have to go look one up for you and give you an idea of what is,
Okay.
an elementary field, is that what you're asking?
Junior high.
we get requests for
Junior high.
for adding a field and providing outdoor lighting at a field that doesn't currently have it, and I just, like I said, was curious if that's what it costs, but it sounds like it's multiple fields.
Yes,
Does
it's
each
baseball.
field cost about the same?
Yeah, you could do some quick math and assume that divide by 4 since there's 4
Right,
fields.
and that would be about the cost of a illumination of a field. Over $100,000.
But that's if you do all these fields though.
Yes.
At a junior high, you might not need.
But it would be over $100,000
to do
light
one field.
Because there's 4 fields that they're lighting with that 455.
That's good, thank you very
That's a
much.
lot.
Really quick, can you help me understand, just because of the wording, the difference in cost with the Woodinville Phase 3?
Yes. This was just for the pre-construction services part of the GCCM contract. The difference between the original and the final was from a permit fee we needed to pay to the city of Woodinville that was best, normally we pay those directly, but in this case it was best expedited by having Cornerstone pay it because they met the city's timeline quicker than we could to get a check cut through our process, and then we paid for it through the pre-construction PO.
So it isn't an incremental cost, it's almost passed through?
Yes,
Okay.
that's correct. It's not an addition in scope or cost, it's a permit fee we knew we'd have to pay, just a different mechanism to pay it,
Oh, excellent.
to meet the project schedule and the city's need for a timeline.
Okay, thank you.
Someplace else it will be $12,000 less.
Yeah, it's a permit fee we knew we'd have to pay.
Right,
We just
right.
thought we'd be paying it directly instead of through that
Yeah.
PO.
Okay, great, thank you, thank you.
All right, next item on the agenda is the first reading of board policy number 3246, use of isolation restraint devices and other uses of reasonable force. This is our first reading. We'll come back for approval on September 8th meeting.
So this is a cleanup of an RCW that was passed last year by the state legislature and then came back again to kind of clean up some of the issues.
Yeah, my understanding is they actually came back and revisited the law this year and broadened it. The law previously had been limited to just students on IEPs and 504 plans, and the law is now generally applicable to all students.
Other questions on this one? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next, which is the first reading of board policy 3423, student sports, concussion, and head injuries. Again, first reading. Any questions, comments?
This is again another policy that we're updating based on recently passed legislation from the 2015 session.
All right, seeing none, we'll,
Well, I did have a concern about this. I've already heard in preseason practice, a friend of mine has already had a head concussion. And do we know how many of our students have these incidences during the school year? Is there any kind of ballpark figure?
I don't know. Rebecca, do you know how many injury reports specific to concussions we've had?
We do have injury reports specific to concussions because
special protocol they have to go through.
Special protocol that we have as a signing healthcare provider for
Would we have any way of being able to quantify that for, say, the last year or two? Just be manual work to dig those out? We'd have to look into that. We don't have the number off the top of our head.
Not even a ballpark yes or no, you'd have to actually just look into it. Yeah, I know. Was hoping someone else had some history around it over there that was nodding heads with her. Now they won't be nodding their heads, but it's something that I keep hearing. It's a real concern that I feel. I know that my father played high school football, and I know that when I had a son, my expectation was he would, but my husband refused to let him, and it was for this reason. So it's just a personal concern.
Larry, moving forward, we could keep a quarter like a by-season report and provide that to the school board.
Fabulous. That would be really fabulous. I think it's good to know.
Do that by Alex.
Thank you.
Any other questions on the policy? Seeing none, we'll move to the next agenda item, which is the first reading of Board Policy 7130, fund balance. Again, first reading. You've seen this fairly recently, but the changes were, as Lydia explained in the memo, due to the law changes in the reporting requirements. So the essence of it doesn't change. Any questions? All right, we'll go to the next agenda item. And Kimberly, you had an agenda request?
I wanted to move to add to the agenda tonight a discussion about our agenda for the board retreat September 8th.
So can you help me understand the essence of the request?
Do we need to second it?
Do you need a second? I second that motion. So you speak to your motion.
I looked over it when we got our board briefing, and there are some things in there that I'm not comfortable discussing with ahead of the new board members being a part of our new board, since you and Don will not be here after November. So particularly the board protocols, and also talking the discussion on the Open Public Meetings Act in 8 weeks, approximately 10 weeks, we're going to have brand new board members and need to go through this again, and it seems that you and Dawn don't necessarily need that training because you're leaving, and the 2 board members coming on do need that training. And so it seems repetitive to not include them as part of the training. And though we do need that, I think we need to wait, and it gives us good dialogue and a good time to discuss these questions that may come up with the new board members. And what was the other thing on there? And just I think it's about the Facebook protocol, which I know we all need to discuss. We talked about that previously. But I don't feel comfortable signing any protocols without the new board members being a part of that, since they're the ones that are essentially bound by what we're deciding.
So do I hear agreement that we would add this as an agenda item to consider retreat agenda? To have a discussion about it? I wanted to understand better what you're asking. So now that we understand that, it's been moved and seconded to add this as an agenda item discussion. All those,
Discuss it.
yeah, all those in favor, yeah, say aye. Aye.
Well, it should be moved to a later date till after the new board members get here. And I mean, I felt that's why I was somewhat you know, it would have helped me as a board member, new board member coming on, having this kind of be the first thing I'm doing out of the gate to be able to understand what my
So-
role is better, to be able to stand in agreement with it.
So let me stop you just for a moment. So this is the current agenda item, Cindy, if you would just manually add it in the.
Sorry.
Okay, perfect. I'll just-
So are we being asked to rejoin the meeting?
And I think it might have been added after
After
this
this?
discussion. We're going to move it out of order and
We can just discuss
Make it
this
number-
and then
make
do
it number 15. Oh, here we go.
What is number 15?
It is 15.
The previous.
Okay. Oh, there you go. There's the one. Could we refresh my memory what the items are on that?
Just go to your drop-down bar and select 15.
Can I get that? What the agenda items are on that retreat?
Well, I'm at a bit of a disadvantage because I didn't know before this afternoon that this was going to be added, so I don't have that with me. But per the request of board members, the Open Public Meetings Act was one of the items that we were going to discuss. The civility, we had a discussion at our last board meeting, or at a July board meeting, I believe it was, where we identified what topics we wanted on the September 8th agenda, and that's what ones went on there. So it's a little bit of a blindside for me today, I have to say.
I'm sorry, I'm not trying to blindside you because I don't see this as a huge deal, rediscussing it right now. It's like this big of a thing and considering what we were just talking about. But when I went to go read through my board packet, and I was gone last week and we had soccer tournaments this weekend, so I didn't get to it until the end of yesterday and this morning. So when I went to read through it, I started thinking about, we're having new board members on, this doesn't, and started churning that and, you know, recognizing that, I do agree that we need to have the discussion about the Open Public Meetings Act, but it doesn't make sense to me that you and Dawn would be a part of that when you guys don't need to know that information any longer. But the new board members do.
I guess I would say that we have 2.5 months left. We have an audit finding that has found us in a violation of the OPMA. And so every day that we're on the board, it's important information for us to have.
And I'm not dismissing the importance, but you guys have been board members for a really long time, and I just think that with Amy and I'll speak for myself, being newer, and then new board members coming on, it's really relevant that, you know, I would rather wait for myself until the new board members come on, because they might bring up questions that I didn't think of, and coming, so that's,
So, yeah, go ahead, I'm sorry, finish. Okay, so.
let's bring them up one at a time. So with that.
Well, see, for me, the board protocols and the Open Public Meeting Act discussion are linked, and for me, this is why. It's, we've had discussions as a board in terms of how to interact on social media, and that's referenced in the board protocols. And we have concern, and we have information from our lawyer that we might be violating the Open Public Meetings Act by having, in terms of how we interact, not if all of us are chatting at the same time, but if one of us chats and two of us sees someone reference school business, you know, for me, I'm after the finding from the audit, I feel hypersensitive in terms of what kind of risk we might be opening up the district to by something we might think is okay. But in terms of, you know, how a joke about carpet turned into an audit finding, I feel like I need more education in terms of what we are currently doing right this very second. And because social media is referenced in the protocols, I totally agree that with new board members, we have to do a lot of training. I would even be open, this is just me talking about it twice. I'm totally okay with talking about it twice. But I feel really, really uncomfortable waiting till the end of November to have this conversation.
So I hear what you're saying, where it doesn't make sense to me is because we talked about this, I think, the end of July, and we put it all the way out till September 8th. And I heard what Larry, you had talked to, I think it was Buzz, and he said, basically, what I understood that to say is don't make any comments on the public discussion group that any of the three of you are on. And I think since that time, or any comments about district business specifically, I think since that time, I have not seen any of the three of us that are on the North Shore School about
For the
district
discussion
business.
group, in the discussion group, and
I
I
have
get
not seen any
terrified.
comments about
I get
district
terrified when I
business.
see even a like, for all I know, a like click is a violation. If I've seen someone affirm that they like an idea, this is why I want to have the discussion, because the audit finding was just surprising to me, and I feel like we've gone out to the public and said, okay, we're gonna have training, and we're gonna address this, and we're gonna take it seriously, and we're going to make sure we really understand all the nuances that it looks like we didn't.
I take it very seriously.
Yeah, and I don't mean to
And that's
imply that you
why-
don't, but just to let you know where I'm coming from. Like I said, you wanna have the discussion twice? I'll talk about it every month if you want to, I'm that concerned about it, that's all.
Okay, I agree. I agree with what you're presenting, and that, the question about if I like something on the North Shores, whatever that website, whatever that, does that imply something? So I think that's a good question. But at the same time, we're asking to redo our board protocols, and I don't feel this is appropriate time to do them. I think we need to do the board protocols with the new board. It's not Janet and Dawn's board protocols, it's mine, yours, Sandy's, and the two new board members that are going to be coming on. So with the Open Public Meeting Act.
Okay, can I make a suggestion? What I'm hearing, that we don't need to completely upend our operating protocols, except maybe to the extent if we learn information that we are violating an Open Public Meetings Act, and that needs to get tweaked. But I'm okay if we have a truncated discussion of it just to that extent of, okay, we've just learned that we're violating it based on the lawyer's advice, here's this is how we need to change them immediately, because we have made a promise to the community that we are going to get training on this. And so I'm with Amy, let's do it twice, let's do it right now, and then let's do it again when we have new board members on. But yeah, I don't know that we need to completely upend all of our operating protocols, that can be revisited in
I thought
January.
that was part of what we were doing on September 8th, was
Well,
redoing all of our board protocols. So I guess I'm looking
no.
at the bigger picture besides just this one little slice that we're talking about, which I can agree with you both on that.
If you recall, there was some concern over my authority to call a meeting in July. And when we looked at our policy and our operating protocol, there was some vagueness in there, and we agreed that when we met when we would be revisiting this, that we would be looking at making sure that those policies were compatible, that they were not in conflict. So that and the OPMA and the use of social media were the big items that we're going to be talking about from that operating protocol. Does that help?
Yeah, I just would like to look at the Open Public Meetings Act, because I hear what you two are saying, and I think the rest of it, we can wait until the rest of the board,
I would
the new
just
board is here.
like to talk about the use of social, because it is in the protocol. The social media is in the
Because
protocol.
that's part of the violation, and Buzz is going to be there, correct, at this? Is the lawyer going to be there?
Ask for him to be there.
Perfect.
So
Yeah, so that-
I would not be in favor of paying an attorney twice. Once again, I will reiterate that this is more appropriate for any new board members that would be coming on to participate in this conversation. They can't participate in it in September 8th.
So just interject a little bit here, you may remember a couple of years ago, the law was changed, and within 90 days of taking office, new board members have to be trained in the Open Public Meetings Act and Public Records Act and the Records Retention Act. And so there's multiple opportunities for them to receive that training, including at the new board member boot camp that will be at the WASDA conference that takes place, I believe, 2 weeks after the November election. So it's not I guess, but my point is, it's not necessarily that the only training opportunity for new board members would be bringing Buzz back in for a full session with the entire board again.
We could have they would have their training, we'll have had this set of training, and then in January, say, when we are looking at board operating protocols, then we don't need to have an attorney present for that.
For 8 years, we have used the operating protocols to gag me, beat up on me in these meetings. So once again, I will not be attending the September 8th training. And a big part of it is, I think it's more appropriate for this training to go on with the new board.
And if that's your decision, totally respect it, but I feel very strongly about discussing it.
In terms of the civility policy, I reviewed the civility policy, and of course, I don't believe any member of this board is in violation of the civility policy that was used as an example, so I didn't see the need to pay people to come in and train us on that either.
Well, again, I will reiterate that at the July meeting, these were the items that the board decided that they wanted on the retreat agenda, and that's why they're on there, so.
I didn't know, I did not at that time think about the fact that we would have new board members coming on. I don't think that was kind of our frame of mind at that point. And I didn't either realize or maybe I did, but I didn't think about the fact that you two are going off, 10 weeks, 8 or 10 weeks from then, and 2 people are coming on. And I think it's really important that the new board members are a part of our total.
Absolutely.
And the
I-
intention
protocols.
is not to circumvent that at all.
I think you need to have that discussion then, absolutely. But we are behind in revisiting it this year
I
for
don't,
this, for our annual review of this particular
that's not,
policy.
and that's what I'm saying, I don't want to do that on, what I'm asking is that we just focus on what you guys, what Amy and Sandy said were important to them, the Facebook piece, the Open Public Meetings Act, and that we focus on that, and the rest of the board protocols we do when the new board members get here, since they're a part of those board protocols, they need to have a voice in it. And again, I think we're shutting out new people's voice if we don't allow them to be able to say, here's what.
I just want to clarify that I specifically stated, I'm very happy to talk about it, the board protocols. We don't have to hire a lawyer for that, in December 1st. I'm very happy, it's not my intention to shut anyone out.
Yeah.
I just don't want to put this.
I don't want to go through all the board protocols,
don't-
just the ones that are
We
related
didn't say we
to
were.
We
We don't
didn't
have
talk, we
to
have
the
not
Open
ever.
Public Meetings Act.
We don't have to. We can, on September 8th, say, good, and then,
And the
I don't
ones that
know.
are in conflict with one another.
yeah.
Those are the ones that we're talking about.
We can
feel
be
like
very,
I'm having a hard time getting this across.
no, we can be very efficient. We can be very efficient.
I don't want to even go good on them. I want to only look at the ones that relate to the Open Public Meetings Act and then allow put off the rest of the board protocols until we get our new board members.
Okay, so is there a huge procedural difference between us doing a check mark, a tick mark, saying, yep, fine, revisiting it in December, changing anything at that point, the composition of the 5 at that point wants to change, versus not doing a tick mark?
Because I might not think that it's fine and they might not think it's fine.
Well, that's why we would revisit it in December, no matter what,
Right.
we're revisiting it when we've got the 2 new board members.
If you're revisiting it in September and a board member disagrees with any of the operating protocol, then you have a much longer meeting and you just opened up the whole thing. And I think that that's what she's saying is, I think that's what
Focus on the
Director
places where we
D'Angelo
think
is
we're in
trying to get at.
violation.
Okay.
Let's just
That's
focus
clarifying.
on that. That doesn't take,
In violation and in conflict.
Okay, so
what conflicts are you, which ones are you referring to?
if, again, I don't have the materials here either, but we've had some discussion this year in terms of how items are added to the agenda, in terms of the board president versus board members requesting it, and there seems to be some conflict within the protocols as to how that happens, and it caused confusion, and I have to say some friction with us. And so the thought was we would discuss it. I don't have it in front of me, so I don't know exactly what the conflict was.
I think that's now, we only have 3 or 4 board meetings left with the board president and with Dawn, so I don't see the need to have that discussion without the new board members to be able to have voice to that.
Once again, the new board members may want to be able to add things to the agenda one way or another, and they have no voice in this.
They
So
will
if you're-
have a voice when they get on board, I guess. I'm so
What's the
puzzled by
point
this
of doing it
conversation.
now, then?
Because we have 5 meetings left, not that I'm counting.
I'm not counting.
We have 5 meetings left, during which I have deferred clarifying things until we have an opportunity to sit down together. And I won't continue to defer that, so I guess I will say that I will operate in a little bit different way based on my understanding of the operating procedures that we're all bound by, whether we sign them or not, because it's a majority policy. So if you're okay with that, then we can certainly take it off the agenda for that day. I was offering you the opportunity to come to a consensus about where our policies are in conflict, the way that I'm reading it. There are a lot of violations that happen during the board meetings, and I guess if we are just going to leave it to stand, I will, for instance, reasonable effort will be made by individual board members to communicate questions to the appropriate staff member prior to the regular board meeting so administrators can be appropriately prepared. I've requested that that be done, and that's not really done. I don't get information from board members that I think is necessary to fulfilling my role as president, so it's a little bit disturbing to me, and it feels like that's a conversation that we can do better in a retreat than having me just saying, I'm sorry, you're not in compliance with the operating procedures. Your questions are deferred.
You're saying that questions in public meetings are going to be now not allowed if they're not run through the board president?
What I'm saying is that we have a procedure that tells us that reasonable effort will be made to ask questions prior to the board meeting of staff members so that it alerts them, because I feel like it's not very transparent in order for the audience members to know the answers to the questions if staff members aren't prepared with what the questions are going to be before they get there. I guess, I mean, if in the broad scope of our jobs, if someone were to ask us a question on any of the aspects of our jobs without asking us in advance or without advising us in advance that they're going to ask it, I think we would feel really uncomfortable. And I feel like that's what's happening with staff. And I was hoping that we could have a conversation of a more reasonable approach, that we could maybe meet in the middle somewhere. But
Questions all the time that I'm not necessarily prepared for or able to give information, and I believe that even tonight was a good example of a question came to mind. So it does concern me that you now intend for the next 5 meetings to define by your parameters questions from the board in an open public meeting.
what I'm saying is that we have a policy, and I'm suggesting that we follow our policies. That's all.
I think that it's a subjective definition to say that, what was it, reasonable effort was made? That's a kind of a subjective term, reasonable. So I would say that that would be a really great conversation for a future board. It sounds very much like at the end of your tenure, you're trying to kind of push through an agenda of this is how I want to see the meetings run, which is perhaps silencing the voice of board members who may have a question during an open public meeting.
I'm not talking about questions that come up. I would never want to silence a question that comes up. But when board members bring a list of questions that they clearly have prepared ahead of time, that they could have given to staff to prepare the answers for, that's the part that I think that we're not following our own policies. So I guess for me, my question is, how can we expect other people to follow our policies when we're not following our own policies? And there are several within that I think are worth discussing. Do we want to do this, or do we want to throw it out as a policy?
Which I think is a topic for a new board. I don't see the point in spending the time at this late date in the final meetings of terms that we're about to turn over, having a discussion about something that a new board should probably have agreement on and have opportunity to discuss as a whole. I agree with Director D'Angelo about that. I just don't think it's appropriate.
So my takeaway from this is, we did have this conversation in July in terms of the fact that we had a lot that we were covering as a board. We hadn't had time to talk about the board protocols. I don't think it's quite fair to categorize the fact that we're going to talk about it September 8th and the fact that Janet would be trying to change everything for her last 10 weeks as president. I don't think that's a fair characterization because this discussion came up all of a sudden today. It was not the plan. The plan was decided in July. So I don't think that's a fair characterization. I just want to say that. If there has been areas within the board operating protocols that have been confusing or conflicting to any board member, I think, whether they be president or not, I think it's very fair to request the ability to discuss them. Now, if we had discussed in July that we were going to be discussing them on September 8th, and there is the desire to perhaps postpone the change of any protocols until the new board members come on, I think that's a very legitimate discussion. Absolutely. But I don't want to negate Janet's desire to fix something that as president she's been trying to wrestle with, and through her experience over the last 2 years she sees as something that's not operating very well, and the fact that she wants to bring it forward to improve it. I mean, the fact of the matter is, as that's written, it sounds to me any reasonable effort means any effort. If no effort's been brought to bring this question to staff beforehand, it's pretty black and white.
Questions come up while I'm sitting up here or come up as I'm driving in my car up here. Though, how can you guys determine what a reasonable effort is? And a lot of times my questions come up as we're having dialogue, as I'm hearing community members talk. The questions start coming to me and I start writing them down right here and making my list. And it's triggered by different things I'm hearing from my community, and I take a lot of offense to that. And I understand we're trying to come to a consensus here, but you know what? I represent my community, and if I have a question that a community member has come up and said that there's an issue within our district, and if I feel like a question has come to my mind, and I'm going to feel free to ask that question, whether or not our board protocols, you feel our board protocols say that I can ask that question or not. I'm representing the community.
Okay.
No question.
All right.
No question.
I believe the question in front of us that we're trying to decide right now is whether we are discussing anything beyond Social Media and Open Public Meetings Act in terms of our operating protocols on September 8th. Now, it does sound like there is a difference in definition of what reasonable effort means. Do we want to discuss that on September 8th, or do we want to wait until the other members of the board, the new members, have taken office?
Oh, is that a motion?
No, I'm just trying to get it clarifying, because it sounds like
I would
we
like
were...
to wait, because
would like to wait.
I'd like to wait, but I agree with Amy about and Janet, about getting the clarity around the Open Public Meeting Act and the Facebook and the social media. I think that's important that we do that now. We could alleviate this by just one of us going off the site. So maybe that's what I'm going to do, is delete myself off the site. But I know there's other sites that the three of us are on, or some not saying she's not on social media, but some form or fashion that 3 of us, 4 are on.
Well, and there's still the
And-
issue that we have promised the community that we would receive training, so.
Agreed.
Yeah, so
Agreed.
yes,
Yeah,
okay,
no,
so
agreed.
just to clarify and to move things along.
Yes, I agree with Facebook, and yes, I agree with the.
Okay, so open public
That's
meetings,
right.
Act, social media, any other things about the operating protocols that we want to discuss on September 8th?
I was a bit blindsided by the controlling of questions, so that, I don't believe that that was a conversation. So I think that it would be fair to board members, if we want to talk about fair, to have that information shared with board members prior to walking into a retreat. What those items of conflict are that the board president is referring to.
Okay, so we'll get that in a board briefing and then have a conversation about that on September 8th?
Not with me.
Sorry, I'm not trying to laugh at it, just getting late.
I think it's appropriate to have these discussions with the new board. I've already stated that. I
Okay.
stated that back in July.
All right,
I won't be in attendance. I've had a 9-hour day today, including a board retreat.
that's why I'm
And this
trying
meeting,
to move this along,
I think
so.
September 8th is, another one at the next meeting is excessive for no reason when the other board members need to be involved in the conversation.
And I understand frustration in changing agenda items. We do this periodically where we change agenda items for one reason or another. And honestly, I didn't think about it in July, or I would have.
And again,
We can move along.
just
Move along.
focusing, so we're
Yeah.
just going to talk about social media and operating protocols on September 8th, and the rest of the operating protocols will wait until December or January.
Is
Yes?
that the board consensus?
Yes.
So OPMA. And what did you say?
And the social media,
Social media.
only within the.
We
You
decided
still
to
have
speak.
the civility policy on your docket.
So, and I will ask, I have a book on civility matters, and I think maybe there was a misunderstanding that this was only for the board, and when I referenced the board, I meant for us to start the conversation about why civility matters, because it felt like we had a lot going on at the district level. But I can ask Larry to put some of these different articles that explain the impacts that lack of civility have on communities and so forth, that go beyond just, you hurt my feelings kind of things, that there's some economic and so forth impacts that when people are unstable to each other, and it goes, like I said, beyond just upward situation, and that's not at all what I was referencing, and I think that Riverview, it's a bigger thing than just the 5 members of the school board.
It's the administration.
Yeah.
And the parents. and
Exactly,
the whole thing.
exactly. It would be a district-wide. So I'll, if it's okay, ask that a couple of these articles be put in the board briefing so board members can kind of read them and get a bigger picture of what I was referencing, and then we can talk about it. And it can be a 30-second conversation and no, this is not what we want to do, or we can flesh it out more. Is that good?
I think
Okay.
Riverview has offered to talk more about it as well. All right, so,
But we're paying Tricia Luback to come in and talk about it, right?
well, apparently we're not anymore. We've just revised the agenda for the September 8th retreat. if I'm
That was my
understanding
understanding, that Tricia Luback was coming in to present a civility policy. And so you're saying it's not quite that? And so
No, she's
that's
coming in
my
to
question.
facilitate our retreat, whatever topics. And before we
Oh, okay.
leave the topic of the operating protocols, I want to be absolutely clear that I'm not talking about questions that come up to you during the meeting or on the drive here, whatever, that I think that you are duty bound to ask those questions. There's no question in my mind that would be what you would do. I'm talking about questions that you have ahead of time that you could give to staff to give them an alert that you are asking them during the meeting.
I feel like most of us try to do that, so I guess I'm, like Dawn said, I'm a little bit blindsided by that because you know, and that's fine, that might be your frame of reference that you're seeing that maybe you don't know, and I think it would be okay. I'm okay with you coming up and asking me after a meeting and saying, Kimberly, was this a list of questions that you had? I don't know that we all need to discuss it, like just a friendly, let's say I personally violated that. In your opinion, asking, did you have that prepared before? You know, just want to remind you, oh no, you know what, I just did it this morning while I was kind of getting together.
So I'm going to also, since we're not going to be visiting it later, I'm going to also ask board members to alert me if they're going to be asking for an agenda request. It just helps me to be prepared with what information I need to bring. I don't have Tricia's agenda with me, so if you would do that.
I decided, I thought about this at 10:30 today, got in the shower at 11, got here at 12. I brought it up within 1.5 hours that I actually went through it. I brought it up at the board retreat within the first 30 minutes. So I understand that you didn't have the stuff in front of you. I didn't think of it like that, but I did bring it up. I felt I was alerting you to the soonest that I had thought about it, and brought it up right in the board retreat and said, I want you guys to know I'm bringing this up as a motion.
I'm not talking about that specifically, I'm just talking about in general. I would appreciate it if you would do that, and then copying me on emails would be helpful as well, so that I have a finger on the pulse. And our the next agenda item is a continuation of the board and superintendent and district goals that we started during the retreat.
Did we have sufficient